Lux Occult is part of the Green Mushroom Podcast Network.
Those who read the news suppose it was MI5 who ran your namesake down. Tires screech, tumbling town cars, tunnel's mouth open wide, the underworld waiting, swallowing up the lot. A tragedy, they said. It both was and was not. In the aftermath, it was silent and hot, cowbirds pecking at a headless corpse, while old dogs licked at festering scars, rabbit pellets stinking, choking up the lot. A tragedy, they said. It both was and was not. The cowbirds dined on the poisoned meat, and pecked at the sick dog's festering scars, while the headless corpse rotted to dust. The rabbit was hit by a speeding car. From a tree nearby watched a little cat, laughing at the joke of it all, languorously stretching a claw. With a Cheshire smile, they licked their chops. Tragedy, they thought. It both was and was not. That was The Death of Princess Di by Sally Forth. Hello and welcome to Lux Occult. This is a podcast where we gleefully taunt the mundane, butcher the Latin and most other languages, and we also discuss a variety of occult, esoteric, and adjacent topics, exploring the intersections of magic, science, art, philosophy, technology, and so much more. Through the lens of chaos magic, this is occultism for everyone. I'm your host, Lux Estrada, and if you're hearing the sound of my voice right now, that means that this show, and magic for that matter, are for you if you want them. There are a lot of different ways to be more free in the world, and using magic or making space for a spiritual practice in your life can be one of them. As always, I do not speak for anybody but myself. Others can, will, and should disagree with the things that I or my guests say on this show sometimes. After all, how will we ever learn anything if we were all in agreement on all things at all times? And like those who attempt to be reasonable should always be willing to do, I often revise my opinions and thoughts about things based on new evidence. Very stoked to bring you a great conversation that I had with Melissa Madara, author of The Witch's Workshop, as well as The Witch's Feast. We'll talk about making your own incense and recipes for different types of spells, dyeing your own magical cords, creating inks, and much more, as well as getting into some theory about deconstructing magical operations in order to better understand how they function, which is something about chaos magic that has always been really attractive to both me and Melissa, and we'll talk a little bit about why that's the case. We'll also be asking, can you talk shit to the gods and still have your operations work? And getting into what Melissa refers to as the lunar occult and Melissa's group Moon Cult. Melissa will share some thoughts about what it means to organize a magical community in a way that's functional and empowers all involved, and I really appreciate what they have to share about that. The Witch's Workshop is full of really cool recipes as well as gorgeous photography, and it's a great companion to Melissa's other book, The Witch's Feast, which you can hear us discuss in episode 50 of this show. Today's conversation was really rad, and I'm hoping that Melissa will be willing to return to get into some of the philosophical territory that we discussed a little bit further. Maybe this winter, we'll see. Podcasts have a lot of moving parts, of course, and people are busy, but having conversations like the one you will hear today in this episode is something that I really value and appreciate, and so I'm so excited to share it with you all. Before we get into that, let me remind you that if you like the show and you like what we've got going on here, you can support it on Patreon. If you do so, you can take a bibliomancy break with me. There are no tiers or levels or whatever, so give as you will. Buy Me a Coffee is also an option for those who wish to show their support with a one-time donation. Thank you so much to everybody who has been supporting. This makes the show possible, quite literally, by allowing me to cover the expenses associated with making it, thereby justifying to myself the not inconsiderable time I spend in production, recording, and other things having to do with it. I really appreciate the opportunity to be making this beast, and having the resources necessary to do that is, of course, an integral part of that equation. So many thanks to the people who are making that possible. Cheers. Although I'm a pretty introverted person, and for that reason do not use social media very much. I'm not there checking on things every day or anything like that, but that certainly doesn't mean that I don't want to hear from you all or anything. I'm beyond lucky to have such amazing and intelligent collaborators, cohorts, co-conspirators, listeners, etc. I always welcome people's thoughts, questions, comments, suggestions, or arcane revelations. You can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com, or you can get me on Instagram at luxoccultpod and accept no substitutes there. All right, I'll be back after the interview to do listener mail and shoutouts. We've got some fun ones, including podcastomancy and thoughts about Lenormand and how Philip Pullman's Golden Compass fits into that. But now, Melissa Madara returns to Lux Occult Podcast to talk about the process of creating your own magical tools, consent, and much more. All right, without further ado, let's get into it. All right, well, my guest once again is Melissa Jane Madara. How's it going?
Good. Thank you so much for having me back. It's good to be here.
Yeah, I'm so stoked to catch up and to hear about your new book, The Witch's Workshop.
Yes, yeah. Just came out, I think, 2 weeks ago. So it's wild to see this thing that I've been working on since like last January finally being out in the world. I've been looking at it for like so long that it almost feels like it loses meaning, or it like, I don't know. It was only existing in my head for the last year, and now it's out in the world. Freaky, freaky stuff.
Oh, yeah. Well, last time we talked, we did talk a lot about, the idea of creating your own materia as being like something that's really important to you. And the last book that you wrote, The Witch's Feast, is all about, creating your own magical food. And there's a lot of cool like history and other research giving the reader like a lot of great context. And so I'm so excited to hear about how that looks in this new book.
Totally, yeah. I mean, we're still in the new book. It's kind of a break from the last one in that we're not talking about food anymore. We're talking about botanical craft and foraging and wild crafting and all of that. But it's still very much in the same spirit of giving people recipes and exercises that they're, to go out and complete toward a better understanding, of the subject and of witchcraft as a whole. Whether we're talking about food or whether we're talking about botanical craft, I feel like the spirit in which both books are created is that like witchcraft is something that needs to be performed in order to be understood. You know what I mean? Witchcraft is something that you need to do in order to fully comprehend its depth and its breadth. And so that's what the recipes and exercises are all about. It's not just about like the theory and the understanding of the conceptual grounding for how magic works, but like now take this little project, go experiment with it and see it for yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's all kinds of things that, are found even somatically or physically or whatever in doing a thing that just can't be translated from language or a book or anything like that. You have to actually do the thing. And I think that when we talk about occultism in general, like this is one of the things that makes the occult like hidden, is that you actually have to do the thing to sort of like understand it.
Absolutely. I think that so much of witchcraft and magic is about the somatic senses, is about the body, is understood through the body, or sort of like even you could say like the non-linear consciousness, the sensing consciousness. And so it is really something that you have to step out of the armchair to do. I forget who it was, and maybe you as a chaos magician will know this quote better than I do. There's a chaos magic book that I read a long time ago that like so aptly put it. And it said that witchcraft, like sex, is something that needs to be experienced in order to be fully understood. Does that quote resonate for you? Do you remember where that's from?
Yeah, I don't exactly remember where it's from, but I want to say it's something that Phil Hine wrote, or Ramsey Dukes, but I want to say Phil Hine. And he's, I've been a huge
giving Phil Hine.
Yeah. Yeah, it's giving strong Phil Hine. Fuck yeah. Shout out to Phil Hine.
That sounds right. Thank you. It's one of the quotes that I carry with me all the time. And so much of my writing is like, we talk about the theory, we talk about the history, all of that stuff is cool, but we have to always center on the practice and the practical. because there's only so much that I can convey, in writing in the amount of space that my publisher gives me,
Mhm.
to talk about magic. The rest really needs to be picked up by the reader, and that's why, I don't know, I kind of think of the recipe books that I've written so far as being collaborative experiences in that way. I can give you a bunch of information, but you really have to take up that work for yourself and begin your own experimentation, start forging your own relationships based on that in order to really flesh out a practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Nobody can sort of like do that work for you. And there's a lot of areas of life where this comes up, like you can read all you want about getting in shape for a marathon, but unless you run, you're not going to, actually have that be a reality in the world. And so, yeah, it's a great example of that. Totally.
True. And that was kind of another part of writing the second book, especially talking about making your own magical tools. Because I feel like we're in this time period now where witchcraft like had its little hype moment, which was great. And now we entered into the commodification of witchcraft. It's not just the Sephora witch kits. It's now a million little small brands telling you that they're the expert on witchcraft and you should give them untold hundreds of dollars
Be a
in
boss
exchange
babe
for,
witch, like,
oh
yeah, all
God,
this
barf.
content.
And I say this as someone who has a witch brand where I want people to buy stuff, but like there's so many people saying like I am the expert on this topic and you should exchange your dollars for my expertise in the form of products that I provide. And that's fine. And I do that too, to some extent. I kind of provide a lot of basic things, but what I think I'm trying to do with my books is create a group of people who are self-sufficient enough to like understand how these tools are supposed to work and not just disempower themselves by like always buying from other people and never getting that direct experience of like engaging with the plants, engaging with the wild world, engaging with the spirits themselves. They sort of outsource that work, to a professional who they quote unquote trust or who builds a sort of aura of trust. And on the other side of that, they are building the skills to be able to tell which products are authentic, to be able to discern like ingredient transparency, as an important factor in purchasing things and being able to look at these products and actually assess them instead of leaving all of that work to just sort of quote unquote experts. I want all of us to be experts, and that's why I'm giving everybody recipes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. As magicians or witches or magical operants of whatever stripe we like to choose to call ourselves, like I think there is really a lot to be said for this idea of agency or self-sovereignty or whatever that doesn't necessarily put you just kind of as a matter of course, just kind of trusting authority, like trusting in like the means of authority of like this person is an authority on making this product, so therefore I will give over this power in the form of my money to them in exchange for their power of their knowledge or whatever. Whereas I think, and that's fine. That's a sort of exchange that happens all the time and that a lot of things are founded on. But I think that for a lot of people who are into magic, like moving away from those types of exchanges and really kind of trying to find your own means of doing that, or maybe having that be something that occurs with your magical allies or planetary forces or genus loci or the spirits of the herbs that you're working with or some other thing that's not a human, I think is part of the game for a lot of people, if that makes sense.
Oh, completely. Absolutely. And back to your point, like, yeah, there's totally like excellent specialist craftspeople in this world who are experts and are doing cool things and who like I want to give untold amounts of money to. Like
Sure.
I can name a million of them and they're
Oh,
cool as
yeah.
hell.
And we can't
But
all be experts in everything. And sometimes it makes sense to like outsource work to an expert if it, like there's absolutely cases where that's totally makes sense. But I think the idea of, as you're saying, like being the one in the driver's seat, really having that agency, that the information to be able to consent to what you're doing, like, do I
yes,
know enough about what this product is that I should put it on my body or have it in my ritual or whatever?
absolutely. And like, I just want to make sure that witchcraft is something that people are doing and engaging with and not something that they feel like they have to buy. Maybe that was just my like 10
Mm.
years at the desk of an occult bookshop, having people come in all the time and asking me to like sell them witchcraft and getting really disappointed when I was like, no, you have to make your own witchcraft at home. You know what I mean?
I'll
There is
take
no,
one witch kit, please.
seriously, people would come in very frequently and be like, tell me what to do for my full moon ritual. And I'm like, you are a stranger from the street. Like,
What are you wanting to do?
what
Like,
do
I
you
don't,
want to
yeah.
do? Why are you asking me? But I think a
Why
lot
do
of
you
people are
want to do a full moon ritual? Like, what gave you that idea in the first place, Yeah.
I think people are so afraid of making mistakes and they're so
Hmm.
afraid of doing it wrong or
Sure.
not being good enough at it or not getting results that they feel really comfortable like completely disempowering themselves and giving that power to someone else. And the witch world is scary and confusing and I kind of get it to some extent. But I'm trying
And
to make new generation of witches happen. If we're going to have our witch moment, right? If we're going to have witch popularity everywhere, my work is going to be the work that like strikes at the capitalist heel, like the one that really says like we can do this in a way where our magic is just about us and we can refocus on the practitioner instead of on the stuff, if that makes any sense.
yeah, totally. It's not about
Mhm.
the tarot cards or the crystals or the herbs or whatever per se. Like, you're the one that's, imbibing these things with intention, with magic, with, the context that's needed to make them magical. They're not a thing that grants you magic by possessing them, is the way I look at it, at least.
Absolutely, it's so obvious to you and I, but then we have a bunch of people, who see the witch influencer with the $80 tarot deck and like the Moldavite, I don't know, shrines and stuff. And it's
Mhm.
entrancing to look at someone who has all this cool stuff and you think the stuff is power. And I feel like that's something that is kind of happening in people's brains as we're watching occultism and social media intersect, which is
Mhm.
something that I love, but also find deeply problematic. I don't know if you struggle with this too.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of interesting power dynamics, I guess, in terms of the lens that I see it through, that are happening, that are fascinating and disturbing and make me feel a lot of different ways.
Right. Yeah. I love the democratizing of information. I love people sharing a wide variety of information on this subject and all of that being made really, really accessible. I also see like a lot of people jockeying for expertise positions and everyone feeling this pressure to sort of know everything and have an opinion about everything all the time, which I think is
Mhm.
just like social media culture in general. But it's really especially like out of step in the occult, which is unknowable, undescribable
Mhm.
by nature.
Yeah, and I think that that's maybe where we get all these appeals to authority, right? Like, well, it's this is what this person wrote in this book, and even if that person like kind of gave it the context that said like this is how I do it, it might work different for you, as most magical authors kind of do somewhere along the lines. People will still kind of like take these little, sound bites or whatever, these little snippets from the book and say, "Oh no, you're not doing your magic right because you're not, properly adhering to this authority that we've decided to like put on this pedestal." And yeah, and I do think it comes back to discomfort and fear surrounding quote doing it wrong or whatever. And this, people are conditioned this way in school and stuff. Like, if you answer the questions on the test the way that you're not supposed to, you are punished. So I think there's good reasons and stuff that this stuff occurs. As practitioners, like, these are the kinds of places within ourselves that we can work on to like really find a lot of personal power and personal agency in our lives. So I'm so excited to hear about, like, I want to get into your book. I feel like
Yes,
we've given
sorry,
so
I could
much
ramble about this
context.
all day. Sure. So the new book is all about that kind of subject. The whole purpose of it is to get people engaging with the land that they live on. There's a lot of recipes in there that are historical, where I'll tell you to go out and get specific plants and recreate, like we've got one from the Petit Albert, if you're familiar with it. It's like a 18th century French book of spells. It's the big famous one that had the Hand of Glory in it. If you're
Mhm.
probably familiar with these books,
Yeah,
but just so
yeah.
your readers have or your listeners have context. But we've got a one recipe from that in my book that's called this medieval dancing powder. It's supposed to be this powder made of a variety of different flowers crafted at specific magical moments that when you blow it over a party of like people dancing and stuff, it will cause the party to become really rowdy. And I think the end goal was to get women to dance topless. Um, and I love this. I think it's hilarious. It's like Mardi Gras powder.
I love it too. Yeah. So we have a little kind of tradition that we do called Pirates Revel, which is a ritual party, or is it a party ritual? We're not sure. But I can definitely see this being a fun thing to throw into the mix there. I love it.
Oh hell yeah. Yeah, I'll send you the recipe for Pirates Revel. Don't worry about
Fuck
it.
yeah. All right.
You try your hand at that. So there's a lot of those recipes in the book, and then there's a bunch that just sort of encourage you to like go out and see what's growing in your area and begin to engage with it on kind of a metamaterial level, on a more than just a materialist level, more than just objectively what's in front of you, the plants as inert. Just sort of try to engage with it and build relationship with not just the individual plants, but also sort of the wider spirit ecologies that are around you. And that's challenging to do for like a wide range of readers, from like beginners who have never encountered witchcraft before to like experienced practitioners who might want to read my book and get some new perspective. But I tried to create a bunch of different experiments and experiences that are all sort of geared around creating objects that can be meaningfully useful within a magical practice. Not just stuff that's good to have, but, things that could be handy either for spell work or, I'm trying to think of like, we even have some recipes for magical perfumes in the book, just to sort of get people thinking about scent and fragrance as magical technology, if that makes any sense. Yeah. So much of my work is about, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, even looking back at like, so much of the classical stuff, like there's always the suggested like fumigation that you're supposed to use for different operations and stuff. But yeah, absolutely.
Oh, totally. We've got a whole incense section. Scent as magic is such an important part of my work. And I honestly could have written a whole book on just that, but my publisher was like, no, let's do a million more crafts, which was fun. And it was exciting for me, and I got to learn a lot in the process, which was cool. I had never really made paper before or like done really elaborate natural dye projects, but I got to do that. And just like we were talking about earlier, like it's one thing to study it, and you get completely different understanding when your hands are in it and you're, seeing how the substances are interacting, watching chemical reactions occur, and having deliberate control over all of that. Very, very cool stuff. So it was something that like the book was something I understood theoretically before I wrote it. And then through the writing of it and the crafting of everything and the shooting of all the photos, it became so much realer and juicier and more embodied to me, the work that we're talking about in this book. So I don't know, it was transformative for me just to write it. So I'm hoping that is captured for readers as well. I hope you can see that I'm like all in on forging relationships with the natural world through green witchcraft practice.
Fuck yeah, I love that. Would you mind speaking a little bit more about how these types of practices can, I don't know, undermine some of the systems of control that we find around us?
Sure. We talked a little bit earlier about being able to spot authenticity in products. So we have this like market right now where it's like overrun with witchcraft products. Everyone's making oils, everyone making incenses and stuff. And when you learn how things are made and you learn what ingredients go into them, you can look at something and say, this is high quality or this is not. And you can make better assessments about what you want to buy, what you want to bring into your practice. But by being able to craft it yourself, you can begin to think about magic as something that's highly personalized, highly specialized. When we look at what's out there on the market, we really see a lot of mass market or mass produced items that are for a general audience for really, really general concerns. We don't see a lot of like heavy, intense specificity because those products simply wouldn't sell. I see that kind of in a few more niche creators, like people who make like really specific astrological talismans and stuff like that, but not really widely on like the witchcraft commercial market. And so I think that when you are able to take these tools up for yourself and understand how they work in a really intimate way, it shifts how you think about your practice as something that needs general all-purpose solutions or something that can be really highly tailored to your personal will, to the magic that you are working, to the practice and craft that you're creating for yourself. It really empowers you and makes your practice more about you rather than just trying to slap a all-purpose solution onto something. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that through kind of understanding these things in our own, like, doing them in our own situations and our own lives and our own spaces, we not only understand more about, the operations that we're doing or the materials that we're making or whatever we're working with, we understand more about that, but we also understand more about those other things because everything is an interaction. We understand more about ourselves, our own practice, our own space that we're working in just through this exploration.
Absolutely. All of it is sort of dialogue toward a deeper understanding, if that makes any sense. And that's not just understanding of like your spells and like getting good results, but understanding how magic works, how you fit into it, and really beginning to build those contextual relationships with spirit, with land, with allies that I think make a practice full and spiritually complete. If that makes any sense. Maybe that's just a personal opinion, but I feel like when magic is no longer about manipulation of materia and becomes about my relationship to reality and my relationship to the allies around me, the practice really gains legs, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that there's a lot of different sort of like depths that one can approach this
Hmm.
stuff on. And
Totally,
yeah,
totally.
and I think that there's especially for people who are just sort of getting their heads around it, there can be a lot to be said for like results-based stuff of just to kind of see mechanically how things are working out. But like and that usually becomes pretty apparent to people pretty quickly, like if
Hmm.
they're
Hmm.
really into that experimentation. And once you sort of like have those very basic building blocks for yourself, like you really do sort of want to make something interesting out of them.
Yeah, and that there's another Phil Hine quote about that. Like, I feel like this episode is brought to you by Phil Hine. Like, but he says that any act that you can perform that demonstrates to yourself that magic is real and it works is worth a million books on so-called theory. Like we live in this world
Yeah.
that like really is disenchanted and disempowers the magical and brainwashes you to believe that like your power is so limited and your sphere of achievable reality is so small. So in the beginning, and I honestly think like as a good reminder pretty frequently, anytime you have an opportunity to demonstrate to yourself that magic is real and it's cool and you can do it, that's an opportunity that you should take. I think it's healthy for all of us to be doing that work
Mhm.
constantly. But for me, what makes a practice full is when we're not just meeting practical end needs, but where magic becomes a perspective and a mode of relationality to the world around us, where it's not just about what I'm doing and it's not about my end goals. It becomes like the entire context for the world that I'm immersed in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking about Sasamba Me by Ramsey Dukes, or I think he wrote it under Lionel Snell. But yeah, that's the beautiful book there about like how, as you know, as a magical operant, the context of magic itself can be the paradigm that we can look through. And yeah, it's really reminding me of that.
Yeah, that's totally my perspective and my worldview. And I think it started with the kitchen witchcraft book where I was like taking the two sort of quote unquote spheres of the mundane world and the magical world and trying to like hold them up next to each other and show people like they're the same thing. They're happening concurrently in the same
Hmm.
place at the same time. And I do that by kind of focusing on like the hyper mundane thing of like cooking and eating and whatever. The sort of like the kitchen world as gateway to magical practice. Just sort of like take a knife and open up the lid on that idea of like we are immersed in a magical reality, and if you assume the work of witchcraft or occultism or whatever you want to call it, that perspective can give you a lot of agency and give you access to a much deeper reality. At least that's how I found it for me.
Yeah, for me too. And I think that at least, especially like getting into some of like the chaos magic stuff, it really offered me some tools to sort of reconcile different perspectives or different paradigms that didn't feel like they could be reconciled before because of like my kind of preconceived notions about them. And
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, my background is in science and stuff, and so like, you know, being able to like reconcile these different ways of thinking or moving in the world has been something that's been really added a lot of like wholeness and everything, and I really appreciate that.
Out of curiosity, what's your science background? Because I also have a hard science background.
Oh, really? Okay, so my degree is in biology, but my focus is in environmental science with that.
Oh, sick. And when I was at college, before I dropped out and became a chef, I had a double major in like public health and the controlling of infectious diseases, and I was in robotics
Oh,
actually.
cool.
So
Fuck yeah.
completely unrelated. It's not like I was going to build vaccine robots or anything, but
Well, I kind of love that for you in an alternate reality.
I love robots.
Yeah,
I
me
feel like
too. I've always loved like robots and machines and stuff. I was actually an automotive technician before I went to school for physics, and then I was seduced by the dark side. The complexity of biology got me, and I changed my major. So,
that's valid. And I feel like I love the idea of an occultist automotive tech. I feel like so much of magic is like fascination with tools and making stuff and putting things together. And I feel like you get
yeah.
into chaos magic because you want to figure out how to take magic apart and put it back together. Does that make
Absolutely.
sense?
I
That's what
actually
makes
have a
Magic
wrench
Dusk
on my
swimming.
altar.
Wait, what did you just say? You have a
Oh,
wrench
I
on your
actually,
altar?
yeah, I have a wrench on my altar.
Hot. I love
It's,
that.
but yeah, and also for me too, like the idea of adding functionality to things is something that's really important to me. It's like there's this thing and like there's just something about it that's not quite working out, and I want to find a way to like adjust it and make it work better.
Yes, I love like getting into the guts of witchcraft and magic. And especially I do that a lot in my like little Patreon group by and this almost feels like a biology description, but I like to take historical spells and dissect them.
Hmm.
And like and it really feels like a frog on a board. I really feel like I'm taking it apart, looking at the various magical techniques, how they interplay with one another, and like reconstructing magical worldviews, talking about perspectives on like, spirit relationships and stuff. And I do a lot of that through like technical analysis of magic. I love that shit. And I feel like you get into chaos magic in particular because you love that shit. Uh,
Yeah. And this is what I like about reading grimoires and shit is I just love to sort of see these because a lot of times like you can kind of like get a really clear look at some of like the mechanics of this stuff. Yeah, it fascinates me in a way that not necessarily that I want to like recreate this work, but that I want to like be inspired by it and like do my own version of it.
Totally. I feel like when we do that, looking at the guts of the machine, we get deeper insight onto how magic has worked for people in the past, and we get tools and techniques that we can expand upon and develop here. One of the things
Mhm.
that we were just talking about in my group this month was we were looking at ancient Greek cursing spells and like a particular technique called the diabole, which I'm totally mispronouncing because my ancient Greek is like most people's absolute garbage. Um,
Well, it is a dead
one
tongue, so it's sure
it
it's
is.
fine.
One of the girls in my coven like has spent so much time researching this, and she teaches me to it like every few months, where she teaches me how to do it, and then I completely forget because there's like 800 vowel sounds, and I'm like, that's
Because
a
of all the
lot of
declensions.
vowels.
Yeah, I studied it. It's a nightmare. I'm not gonna lie.
Rough. But the technique that we were looking at was this curse technique where you basically like you call up the gods and you lie to them that the person who you don't like did blasphemies about them, like went to their temple and put poop on the altar, or
Yeah.
you make up all these like silly, incredulous lies about them. But then we got into this cool discussion about like what does it mean to worship gods that you are allowed to emotionally manipulate? A lot of us come from Abrahamic backgrounds where that is like such a taboo thought and also not even possible in the context of an omnipotent God. But then we look at the ancient Greeks having these relationships with their divinities where they're able to kind of fuck with them a little bit and like
Yeah.
shit talk and
Yeah.
lie and get a rise out of them for personal benefit. And so like I don't want to do those kinds of spells. I'm not going to call up Hecate and be like, my
Fuck no.
landlord peed in your temple. Like I don't,
Fuck
that
no.
feels a little silly to me. I mean, but now everyone knows you can. It's valid. It works. It's historically tested.
Perhaps, yeah. And what's gosh, I have so much to say about this. Like, I think that there's so much of cursing magic, which is kind of like advanced shit talking, right? And I think that
Yes.
there's something interesting in that in itself. But like with the curse tablet thing, as far as I understand, and I'm not like an expert on this, but I have studied this a little bit, and like a lot of these curse tablets and other things like them were sold by the temples too. So it's possible
Yes.
that some of these would have been sold by, cults for people to just basically fill in the names,
That's
like
completely it. Yeah. We talk about that in the article where these were like made for hire by specialist magicians. And so they're called slander spells. They had these slander spells ready to go where they were like, what's their name? Emily? Okay. Emily took a poop on the sacred vase. Emily ate the sacred fish. Emily, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
and they just popped it in and chucked it in a well, and whatever happens to Emily happens.
Mhm.
Like, and that's another level of abstraction that's even funnier for me. These are like the most priestly class that's like devoted, practitioners of magic, and they're being paid to just like fuck with their gods constantly and send them after, anyone who
So
they
I'm wondering, just like kind of thinking about the mechanics of how this thing might work. Like, I wonder if there's something in it where it's like you get yourself all lathered up thinking about how horrible this person is, and maybe you have to like stretch the truth a little bit to get there in your mind to like get that anger or whatever. But like, I wonder if there's like something in this emotional resonance, like in so much of if we look at like old like conspiracy thought or other types of like slander, right? Like a theme that comes up over and over and over again is like, oh yeah, those people over there, they kill and eat babies, or they do other things
Yeah,
that are very adjacent to that, because that's
it has
basically
to
like
be
the worst thing we
hyperbolic.
can think of, right? Like,
Yes, completely, completely. And we were talking earlier about how witchcraft is, it moves through the body, it enters through the somatic senses. And I feel like it also becomes through the somatic senses.
mm,
And so I can absolutely see like you getting yourself riled up to the point of frothing at the mouth with hatred and then submitting that sort of like somatic experience to a divinity and saying, you take this on and, affect it elsewhere. I feel like that's a natural extension of witchcraft being an embodied experience, a sensing experience, and not like a logical experience, if that
mhm.
makes any sense. The fact that this emotional manipulation is at the core of it.
Yeah, yeah.
I feel
So
like we could do this all day, like unpack magical
yeah,
techniques.
gosh, there's so much here. I'm
I
hoping
know.
we can talk a little bit about Moon Cult. I'm so curious to hear about what's going on over there.
Sure. So when I created Moon Cult, I used that word a little bit tongue in cheek. It was mostly just meant to be an online place where I could organize all of my research and writing and, thoughts about witchcraft and then share it with the world. It started as like a little baby Patreon and like my little tiny Etsy apothecary shop with like 9 tinctures in it. And that was just sort of like me sharing my practice, my magical tools that I make for myself, and sort of just like I don't know if you've ever seen The Office, but it was like Creed thoughts, but for me, as it was like just for me to share like like the intricate thing, like the weird little pockets of my research, if that makes any sense, stuff that my
Yeah,
publisher won't pick
yeah.
up. And then it has really grown through a collaboration that I did with my other friend Melissa, believe it or not, two Melissas, Melissa Constance, who runs the Open Sea Design Company, which is like a beautiful occult inspired like paperwares and ephemera company. They make journals and like nice letter paper and stuff like that. We collaborated to make the Witch's Yearly Planner, which was like 12 months of rituals that you can do that are sort of centered around seasonal transits, astrological things happening throughout the solar year, and full moon astrology and all of that. And so we created this like crash course in witchcraft for people who just want to like pick it up and, try their hand at some experiments. And a community kind of sprung up around that of people who wanted to be practicing magic, wanted a little bit of guidance on how to do that, and were really, really thirsty for the historical context and like the theoretical underpinnings. And so it started out as just me yapping, and then it became this community of people with like-minded research interests who are like sharing information together. So when I say I started using the word cult tongue in cheek, it really ended up becoming kind of like a sphere of people with similar interests in witchcraft who are interested in researching the same topics. I really feel like just through using that word, we called the people forward who are all like, interested in the moon cultists, interested in all sort of occult research underneath that dominion. And it really is guided by my interest in lunar mysteries, lunar spirits, and like what I call the lunar occult, like divination, dream work, working with certain plants, especially poisonous plants. Like all of that falls under the domain of what I consider moon magic in my practice. And just by putting it out there, the community sort of it was really much if you build it, they will come, and they will create the house that we all live in, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I fucking love that. The term cult has like such a gosh, there's so much baggage and stuff associated with it. And I love what you're saying about like there's an old version of this word of like, everybody like kind of like centering around this idea of like these common goals of, it used to
Mm-hmm.
be like what a religion was like a cult of Aphrodite or a cult of
Yeah,
Apollo or
that is
whatever.
really how I see the group. Yeah, I really see us as the moon cultists, all of us sort of dedicated to the moon, quote unquote, broadly, very, very, very broadly. And that's what kind of brings us all to the space. But I know that in the modern world, that word has a lot more baggage. I don't know. I was just, and it's weird. I've been engaging with a lot of like modern cult media over the last year and kind of chewing on that term as well. Like looking at the Love Has Won cult. And I feel like there was just a documentary that came out about like the new TikTok 3M dance cult and like thinking about cult structures, especially because now I'm at a place in my practice where like I don't necessarily provide spiritual services to people, but I am in a position of leadership within my community, and it is a community that has spiritual underpinnings. And I feel a lot of responsibility to do this correctly and do this equitably and to avoid all of the other baggage that comes with that word, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because, yeah, I've been researching this a lot. And I think that that's kind of like the theme that comes up over and over again is just sort of with a lot of situations that end up being called, cults or whatever. It's these kind of unhealthy social dynamics, oftentimes centering around leadership, either being outright abusive or just like not being able to take accountability for things like that. And yeah, so I really respect that. Even if we don't sort of say, oh, I want to be a cult leader, right? Like if you're an organizer of a group or whatever, like there does come a point where it's like you do have to sort of own that, or else it could become kind of a destructive situation or an unhealthy situation and stuff. And so like, yeah, I think that that's something that's really worth being aware of and being cognizant of and asking questions about. Like one of the things that I've been wondering so much about is like how do we find ways of within our magical spaces and where we want to like do group work, whether that's online or in person or whatever the situation is, like how do we find ways of stepping away from some of the broader systems that we don't want to interact with as much? Like how do we make our magical spaces not just be little microcosms of the greater society where people are kind of disenfranchised because of like differences in power or privilege because of things like patriarchy or race or other things like that. And yeah, it's something I've been thinking a lot about.
Sure. Yeah. No, I hear you. I feel like one of the ways that I attack that in Moon Cult, and like I feel like also as a community leader coming out of Catland, which is like my old bookshop, and now entering this space, I really heavily focus on like constantly empowering my students through putting them in touch with like firsthand documents and materials, recipes and experiments, and like really trying my hardest not to gatekeep or hold back anything, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
All of my students have access to like a full library of like public access PDF grimoires. All of my source material they have, and I remind them constantly about it. And I try hard to make sure that my brand is not like a constant sales pitch for my classes, my products, me, and my ideologies. And that's the other thing, is to never be prescriptive about an ideology and to tell people this is how this works. I'm always couching it in historical context, in cultural context, and really framing witchcraft as a global experience, as something that's been happening from the dawn of humanity till now and is still very much active in the world, but has just taken a variety of different forms. And so there's not one that's better or more precise or more useful, and presenting them all as concepts for people to engage with and giving them examples of engagement, either from history or from my own practice, rather than saying, here's how witchcraft works. I am the authority on that, and I will not share the fount of my arcane wisdom with you guys. All I want to do is like smash a faucet off the fount of arcane wisdom, if that makes sense. I want everyone to be able to swim in that stuff. And I feel like that's characterizes my role as a community leader, and that is something that I always use to check myself.
Yeah, fuck yeah, I love that. And I like what you're saying about like not gatekeeping and stuff. And I've seen a lot of situations too where people, in order to become part of a group, will be asked to like undergo certain types of like procedures or, take part in certain types of exercises, journaling, meditation, and stuff like that. And like, I think that while this can be cool, I think there's a lot of places where it's not sort of like explained well enough about like what the actual psychological effects of like taking part in these types of activities are. And so like I see a lot of issues with like consent and stuff like that surrounding this stuff. So like what you're saying about transparency, making sure everybody has access to the information, in my opinion, anything that's worth participating in will stand up to scrutiny, right? Like
Totally.
so if it's not willing to do that, it might not be worth participating in. And so yeah, thank you so much for being so cognizant of that with your work. I definitely respect that.
Of course. You know, maybe there's a useful conversation we can have here about this other part of my work that I do. And I feel like you might have opinions on this that'll be like interesting for us to tuck into. As a part of like Moon Cult, there's the articles that I write, there's the classes that I teach, there's the products that I make. I'm a Gemini and I'm doing too much. And there's also, I run these full moon rituals here in Brooklyn. And it started as something that I did at Catland just to be like, the community wants to come out and do something. I would love to give them a safe place to do that and a
Mhm.
way to engage with witchcraft authentically. I have to think about how to do that for an audience of people with different experience levels, different backgrounds, different beliefs, and find a way to still make it authentic and to craft a spiritual experience that everyone is on board for, that is useful and good for everyone in the room with all of those different like backgrounds and nuances is really, really challenging.
Mhm.
And one of the ways that I go about that is to make it kind of modular, if that's the right word. Make it so that every single piece is completely explained to all the participants. Like, here's why we're doing it, here's why it's important. And you can opt out if you are not feeling it. If you don't want to say this prayer because there's words that you're like, that feels too much like I'm praying to something I don't believe in, don't say it. If you don't want to receive this oil anointing on your head because you just are not sure about these plants, don't receive it. You can still engage in the entirety of our experience and maybe just audit as someone who wants to learn and watch, you know, rather than participate. And so the rituals themselves, there's a lot of active pieces. There's a lot of like, we get to do witchy church. We get to stand up, sit down, scream, you know, drink
Mhm.
from the sacred goblet, like all that good stuff. But it also becomes kind of a lesson in witchcraft technique. There's so much explaining, it becomes like a mini class. And the consent piece is really at the core of it begins when people walk in the door and I give them an option to take a little bit of mugwort oil that I make on the forehead as just like a little anointing before we come in. And I make every single one of them either nod yes or shake their head no as
Mhm.
they come in, because I want them to know that they have that agency within my space. That even though I'm the one in front of the room who's like waving shit around, you can tell me I don't want to do this, and that's okay. And you can still enjoy the experience we're having. It's
Mhm.
really hard to craft an event like that, but I take such great care to do it because to me, that's what an authentic in-person witchcraft experience should be like.
Yeah, I agree. I love that. And honestly, I try to do the same things when I, present things to a group. Like even if it's a small group of people that I like know, I still have that like I'll try my best to have those components in there where it's like this is what we're going to do. This is why. People have told me that I'm being overly thorough. I've actually gotten teased about this a little bit, but I don't care, honestly. Like I would
Wow.
rather
Ooh.
get teased or whatever than encroach on somebody's boundaries in a way that made them feel shitty or that caused, any kind of tension or anything like that. That's the opposite of what we want to have in those spaces.
Absolutely. Consent is so cool.
Fuck yeah.
Consent is the coolest. Like, how could someone tease you about getting people's permission and like and not just consent, but also like I feel like when you explain things to people, that's the way to achieve consent. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like if I just bring people to an event and don't explain what's going to happen to them and just assume that because they're there, they've signed up for all of it, like
Yes,
nah.
consent is informed. Absolutely. You can't say whether you want to do a thing unless you know what that thing is. So yes.
Yes. Oh my God. Why me and you need to teach the rest of the witchcraft world how to have rituals.
Well, this is something that I'm very, very into. Like with the new project that Green Mushroom Project is doing, Void House, like we're actually going to be like getting into the nitty-gritty of consent and ritual and kind of looking at consent as being a really central ethos to operate from magically. We're working with some really cool people, got some awesome collaboration stuff going on and everything. And but yeah, if you're into the idea of talking about consent and ritual and stuff, like I think that yeah, I would love to have some conversations with you about this. We're going to be actually in September offering free to whoever wants to attend it a consent workshop surrounding consent and group magic specifically that Consent Academy is going to be constructing for us. So shout out to Consent Academy, really cool organization, and yeah, really stoked to be exploring this topic because I do think that it's really magically potent. Like we think about the idea of the will, we think about the idea of like energetically interacting with people. Like when we're all on the same page and we're all putting our intention and our will in like one direction, like that's what consent looks like, and that's also what very powerful magic can result from.
I think that that's the thing that I wish I could impress on people is that through consent, we achieve greater power in our magic. Going back to our conversation about like people who are so worried about doing the wrong thing that they really just want to be led. I feel like that is, if I could like instruct the world, if I was a TikTok witch influencer or whatever, that would be like the core of my platform, is like how much you lose when you choose to just be led, and how many people, I don't want to sound like a fear monger, but like how many people honestly would gratefully take advantage of a
Mhm.
person like that, who just wants to be led within a ritual experience, who just wants to be told what to do, where to move, what to believe, and allow an experience to happen to them instead of participate in an experience that they understand.
And I think it might not only just be people that want to be led. I think that a large component of it, we're social creatures, is that people just want to be part of the group. Even with
Yeah.
something like flat earth theory, I don't think most of the people that are like hanging out at those flat earth parties actually fucking think the earth is flat. I'm sorry. I think they're there for the social aspects because they want to hang out and have a good time. It's probably pretty fun. I'm sorry. Right? It looks fun. They look
Right?
wacky and fun. So like
Well, like in chaos magic, we agree that belief is a tool. And I think that in
uh-huh.
that case, the tool is being used as for social currency, right? We're
Yeah.
assuming the belief of the earth is a, oh God, just
Yeah.
just a big domed, like flat. What's the shape that they believe? Is it fully flat? It's like a big
I think
circle,
there's
right?
different iterations. I think it depends on
I love
exactly who you ask, but
I didn't know there was dissent in the ranks of the flat earth. Uh, oh, I mean, I have nothing to say on that. I feel like I've met occultists who believe kookier things, like
sure.
and to believe to be a part of a group. They find their people.
And there's nothing wrong with that at all. Like as I said, we're social creatures. I think this is very much deep within us and stuff. And like I would just yeah, if there's a way of offering to people tools where this can happen in healthy ways rather than ways where people are being disenfranchised or predated upon or whatever, as so often happens, as you said, like somebody will see that and very happily take advantage of it if that's the type of person that they are.
Absolutely. I think about that a lot in terms of the modern cults that we're seeing. The hometown one for me the last few years has been, what was that cult up in Albany? It has like an X in the name. Keith Raniere was the guy
Oh,
in charge.
Nexium. Ugh, yeah, of course.
Nexium, yeah.
Yeah.
That was the most heartbreaking one for me because it was I'm in New York State, so it was
Hmm.
like my New
Sure.
York State hometown one. And watching like honestly not bad like self-help technology, but couched in such language and theory that has you just following one person, just
Hmm.
following one ideology, has you fully dependent. That's the word that I was looking for on what did they call him? What was their word for him?
Oh gosh, I don't remember.
The Maverick, or like the he had some special title. And there we go back to gatekeeping, like information and wisdom. It all comes through one
Hmm.
person, right? But I just looked at that as like the total inversion of like everyone shows up wanting to be led, fully willing to accept all of these ideas, fully willing to be broken down and remade. And where are they led to? Just the slaughter of their wallets, essentially. Like just to
Yeah.
becoming like cash cows for this business, essentially. It's so hard to do community and business simultaneously, and I feel like the business aspect can sometimes poison the community aspect. That was really challenging to do when I was at Catland Books as an occult shop that's like trying to stay afloat and survive in an era where doing that as a bookshop is hard, and also
Sure.
build authentic and good community around like high quality education and resources. So hard to find that
Yeah,
balance.
while trying to make that accessible to people and yeah, there's a lot of
Oh,
different like forces pulling you different ways in that situation.
it really has to be part of your mission to do it, or else it's easy to allow the business side, the need to extract funds from customers, to be like the reason you're there. And
Mhm.
when we have spiritual services that are grounded on those grounds, I feel like we set ourselves up for predatory behavior.
Sure.
Maybe not like
Absolutely.
naturally, not as a natural extent. You can certainly like have a small spiritual business that's not, predating upon people, but it becomes challenging to negotiate.
Yeah, well, I think yeah, it depends on like sort of model that you're working with and stuff. And
Totally.
like under capitalism, it's difficult to have for-profit models that like, don't eventually, if they get big enough, become gross. Or maybe if they don't get big enough, like it just really gets so
Yeah.
dependent on who's in charge and how much accountability they're willing to take and all of the rest of it. So yeah.
Totally. I feel like one of my friends just graduated business school last year, and one of the things that they always said there was that any business, when it gets sufficiently complex, will just become Spirit Airlines. It in
Yeah.
that when it becomes big enough, it will just be something that sucks money out of customers and gives them nothing, because that's the nature of like a profit-driven experience, is that it's always going to be about that bottom line. So I feel like if we're going to be doing spiritual services for people, we have to have greater impetus for our work and greater like philosophical underpinning for our work than just this supports me personally as an individual and I do it to make my monies.
Yeah, maybe like a really clear sort of like, personal ethos or mission statement
Mm-hmm.
for yourself is like, why am I doing this work and what is the ultimate, statement of intent for it if it was a huge magical ritual or something like that? Like, what is the actual
Yeah,
thing that I
yeah,
want out of this?
absolutely. Yeah. Such a good conversation for us to be having in this modern world.
Yeah, I'm looking
Uh,
at the time. I can't believe we've been talking about this for this long. Gosh. So,
Sweet.
is there anything that you want to talk about that I haven't asked you about, or anything that you want to like touch on, or anything like that? Any questions you want to ask me, or anything?
I feel like we've covered so much already. The stuff that I always love to talk about is just my nitty-gritty work with historical spells, but we've covered that so beautifully. It's great to be talking to. I feel like chaos magic is such a useful tool for navigating the world of the modern occult, in which there's so many different perspectives and so much knowledge and information that it's kind of overwhelming in a lot of
Mhm.
ways. To take kind of a very technical look at magic, which I feel like chaos magic does, and also a way of looking at it that's incredibly anti-dogmatic in a world where you have so many different perspectives and belief structures and, traditions to parse through. I feel like that is such a useful paradigm for looking at magic in the modern world. So it's great to be having discussions about modern magic with someone who's of the same brain. Not to disrespect people who don't do chaos magic, but it truly rules.
Yeah, fuck yeah. I mean, I think it offers like some really useful, maps or systems of organizing these things, or as I said earlier, like ways of reconciling different ways of thinking or
Mhm.
knowing and stuff that, yeah, I mean, no matter what type of magic you're into doing in your, daily practice, chaos magic can be a really useful philosophical framework to kind of look through to sort things out. And so, yeah, I'm stoked to be talking to you too. This has been a really fucking rad conversation. Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time
Of
to
course.
talk with me.
Always rad. Every single time I come on the show. Thank you so much for having me back.
Yeah, thank you. And I would love to get more into consent at some point if you ever be into it. I sort of want to do like a whole series on this at some point here.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have so much to say on that
All right, fuck yeah. Well, Melissa,
topic.
where can people find your work?
If you are looking for more of me, the best place to find that is on my website, which is mooncult.com. That's CVLT, like the old Roman spelling. You can also find me on Mooncult on Patreon. That's where you can find my class recordings, previous lectures, all of my articles. And there's a bunch of them that are free every single month. I try to make sure that my deep dive articles that go really, really hard on one topic every month are totally free for people who are not even signed up to the Patreon to read. So you can get kind of a good sense for my work there and see kind of what's available. And if you just want to follow me on social media, I'm Saint Jane, Jayne, which is my middle name. And you can find me there. You can see, announcements about what's coming up, little snippets of history and folklore occasionally. Some of my cooler recipes might go up there. And then you can just sort of follow along with like what's coming out and what's going on. Those are the three places that you can find me and my work, my apothecary shop, my classes, all that good stuff.
All right, fuck yeah. Well, Melissa, do you have any last words of advice for the listeners and I?
Do your own magic. Don't buy it from people. You will become such a better practitioner when you learn how to make your own stuff and you just go out and try it for yourself. If I had known that at the start of my practice, I would be years ahead where I am right now. So I want everyone, even if you feel like you're a beginner and you're too afraid to make a mistake, fuck that. Make mistakes. Mistakes are a wonderful, wonderful education tool. And it's more important to get your hands dirty and to get your fingers burned than it is to avoid mistakes in magic.
Fuck yeah, I love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is the train to Hartford. The next station to Melbourne.
All right, thanks so much to Melissa Madara for joining me. Check the show notes to find links to the Witches Workshop as well as to the Witches Feast and Melissa's Instagram, where you can keep up to date with all the cool stuff that they've got going on. As I said before the interview, I really appreciate a lot of what Melissa had to share today. And I really respect the way that they focus their work on education and individual empowerment. It's one of the ways that you can tell the real deal from the bullshit artists a lot of the time. So fuck yeah. You can hear Melissa and I discuss their book The Witch's Feast in episode 50, Kitchen Grimoires, Edible Occultism, and Erudite Hedonism with Melissa Madara, and Divine Chaos with Derek Hunter, which is another awesome set of conversations. So check that out if you haven't already. Or perhaps re-listen if you have, I don't know. All right, let's go ahead and do listener mail and shout-outs. Shout out to Lonnie Scott over at Weird Web Radio. I had such a great time talking about chaos magic, Austin Osman Spare, and my work with Hecate, as well as getting into consent and magic and our new project with Green Mushroom Project, Void House, creating a consent-forward magical space for conducting group work both in person and online, and investigating the magical and alchemical properties of consent. Check out episode 101 of Weird Web Radio, available where you find podcasts, or check the link in the show notes to that. I had a great time recording this conversation, and it's a very fun way to kind of get a look into what I've got going on in my own personal practice, if you're interested in that. Shout out to Revelor Press. Super honored to have my work included in Serpents of Circe, a manual to magical resilience, edited by Laura Tempest Zarkov and Ron Pedron. Check out the show notes for a link to order that now. And yeah, big honor to be included amongst several very talented occult authors. So fuck yeah. Also check the show notes to a link to get tickets to Kink School, the online BDSM education convention, where me and my buddy Damien Agony will be teaching a class about sigils and sex magic this November 23rd. You can use code LUXA10 to get 10% off your tickets. Shout out to Rachel and Teresa. Always a pleasure to swing steel mace with you all. Check out fourthdimensionfitness.com to find online steel mace flow and strength training classes. Shout out to Susanna and the whole Rock Pit Yoga crew. Thanks so much for listening and for providing such awesome classes. Always a joy. Shout out also to CJ Lane and to Axel. Good luck with those fairies. All right, Lilith Andromeda writes in with some thoughts about the Language of Lenormand episode, which is number 86, Learning the Language of Lenormand with Erica Robinson. Andromeda writes, "Hey Luxa, just wanted to share a thought I had while listening to your episode on the Language of Lenormand. Having no prior familiarity with the system, it reminded me of the alethiometer in the book The Golden Compass, and I can't wait to fall down that rabbit hole." Fuck yeah, I absolutely love that. The alethiometer is sort of like a compass thing that has all these different symbols on it, and I could totally see the crossover of how that could kind of correspond with Lenormand. I can't wait to hear about how that rabbit hole goes for you. Cheers. Shout out to David Sicola, hopefully I'm saying that right. Very excited about the print. David writes, "Hey, I just wanted to tell you that I wanted to use your bibliomancy to find a title for my last lino cut. But because I'm lazy and don't know where my old D&D dice are, I decided to be more creative and did podcastomancy. So I asked Eris to guide me and scrolled through the list of your podcast episodes randomly and clicked on one. It was episode 23, Eris at Work, of course, all hell Discordia. And then did the same thing scrolling through the episode, and the guest on the episode said, 'What is my middle name?' And it fit perfect. So it was so synchristic about what I did today, and just wanted to share that. Greetings also from Belgium." Well, greetings and thanks so much for sharing. That is very fun and exciting. I love it. Gratitude to everybody who's written in, whether or not your missive was included in today's listener mailbag. If you'd like to send thoughts, questions, comments, or suggestions, you can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com or at luxoccultpod on Instagram. If you like the show and you like what we've got going on over here, you can support it on Patreon, which will entitle you to receive a bibliomancy reading from me. Making this show is, of course, a pretty wild amount of work, especially for just one crazy person, but it means a lot to me to be able to do it. Thanks so much to the people who are making that possible by giving on Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee, and to the people who are supporting the show by spreading the word. Tell your friends, allies, magical associates, enemies, etc. about it, as well as everybody you meet at the next ceremonial potluck or as bot you attend. Also, posting about it on social media or writing positive reviews where that's possible are super helpful. So thank you so much to everybody who is doing this stuff. And yes, don't forget to smash the fucking shit out of the follow or alarm or whatever button so that you can get updates when new episodes come out. I've been having a really fun time on the Discord server with the in-character chat for role-playing with the Wreck This Deck game. Check out episode 85, Demons, Playing Cards, and Wreck This Deck with Becky Annison, and Secrets of Greek Mysticism with George Lissos to hear about that game. It's been a really cool opportunity to explore some solo roleplay in a semi-collaborative format. It's been a cool kind of crossover. There's of course lots of fun and free activities going on in the Green Machine Discord server, home of the Green Mushroom Project and Void House. Join us for our weekly Fungal Friday chats about a variety of magical topics, as well as special events like ceremonies and seasonal celebrations. We have a monthly rune study group and a book club in which we are exploring Aidan Wachter's 6 Ways at a slow and languorous pace, really kind of sinking our teeth into it. And coming up soon, I'm going to be leading a club every third Wednesday evening for a while called Subversive Book Club. We're going to begin with the Illuminatus trilogy by Robert Shea and Robert Anton Wilson, followed by The Gate to Women's Country by Sherry S. Tepper. We're going to be talking about the first book in the Illuminatus trilogy, The Eye in the Pyramid, on September 18th. So go ahead and read or reread that and join us for the fun as we dissect the narrative and talk about all of the things that have and have not aged well about this book. On September 14th and 15th, 2024, Void House will be hosting a free 2-part workshop about group magic and consent presented by the Consent Academy. There will also be a special Fungal Friday the 13th chat to lead us into this, which I am hosting, called Sexy Spooky Consent Chat. It should be a really fun time, as well as a good way to build your nuanced understanding of consent, intent, magic, and much more. And I'm very stoked to be working on production for an episode now in which a couple of folks from Consent Academy joined me to talk about their work, as well as some intersections between spirituality and consent and intent and all of the rest as well. It's going to be a good one. I'm going to try to get that out a little bit early if I can swing it. We'll see how it goes here. Shout out and much love to all of the Pocket Wizards. Really honored to be part of such a cool and smart and kind community. I'm continually impressed by the talent and thoughtfulness and intelligence of the people who have come to hang out on the Discord and everything, and I'm really stoked to be doing the work that we've got going on now with Void House and exploring consent, and how much more fun and cool that has the potential to make things for ourselves and for others in our community. So fuck yeah. Much love and much love to everybody participating in the Green Mushroom Project, regardless of what that looks like for you and your practice. It's been an interesting and wild ride, and I'm so excited to see where the road will continue to take us. Alright, as is the custom on this show, I will bid you a fond farewell after sharing the Green Mushroom Project's statement of resistance. Remember to resist. Resist by maintaining sovereignty of the self. Resist by maintaining love of the self. Resist by maintaining fierce loyalty to love and pleasure. Resist with acts of radical kindness. Focus on the path to better times. Fuck yeah. Thanks so much to Melissa Madara for joining me. The last time they were on the show, they left us with the thought that we should have higher standards for the books about magic that we consume. Read better occult books, I think is how Melissa put it, if I recall correctly. I agree, so I urge you to check out The Witch's Workshop as well as The Witch's Feast. Both books are awesome resources for getting more in depth and finding a grounded footing in your practice. Thanks so much to all of the help and support from both seen and unseen sources. Gratitude. And most of all, thanks so much to you for listening. Much love. This is Lux Estrada, reminding you to stay strong and stay fucking curious. Alright, I'm going to leave you all with a little sound sigil I produced called The Train to Hartford. Cheers. Those who read the news suppose it was MI5. There is random storm safe down. Tires scratch, tumbling town cars.
This is the train to Hartford. The next station is Wheeling.
A tragedy, they say.
This is the train to Hartford. The next station is Meriden.
I am Hecate of the crossroads, who stands at the threshold of sleep to welcome you into dreams. In the evening, when the dancing shadows of tree limbs play across the land, and when the morning star rises high to cavort amid the rays of soul, I stand also at the threshold of wakefulness to welcome you to your work.
From a tree nearby.
I am Hecate who stands at the crossroads of life and death. When you are new, I cradle you with tender care, protecting you from harm that might befall you. And when your candle burns low, I will welcome you home, to sit with me always in the house of magic. I am Hecate, mother of witches. I will stand at your back during any just battle, and tend to the wounds you encounter in the field. When you are mine, I will make you strong in your art, and grant you the wisdom to wield your gifts wisely. I am Hecate who rides the tides of the moon, and adds weight where it is needed to restore balance. I am Hecate, the cord that binds, and the knife which cuts this cord. I am Hecate, Anodia, Hithonia. 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 Hecate, Anodia.
This is the train to Hartford. The next station is Meriden. This is the train to Hartford. The next station is Meriden.
Lux Occult is part of the Green Mushroom Podcast Network.
What scares you?
Ghosts, aliens,
Monsters?
the occult, conspiracies.
Some of you like to be scared, and unearthing paranormalcy is for you.
Some of you try everything you can to avoid it. Unearthing paranormalcy is for you.
We take the topics that scare some, and we dig in to find the source, then present the history to make the paranormal a little more normal.
We also throw in a bit of comedy to shed a light on some of the darkness in the world.
So whether you're scared of bumps in the night, what's inside your own mind, or strange lights in the sky, we cover it all.
We dig in and present all that we find and try to come up with some logical
And not so logical.
reasons for the high strangeness happenings.
Sometimes we are scared of the things we don't understand, and the more we understand, the less we fear.
So find us, Unearthing Paranormalcy, on your favorite podcast app. And join us on Facebook, Instagram, and Discord at UMP Normalcy. And until next time.
Keep digging.